Hi, and welcome to Module 5. Today is Thursday, November 9th, and we are discussing this week the equity and fairness components of the Pay for Performance Plan system or design. With regard to pay for performance, equity, and fairness, we're looking at primarily two parts of that. First, we're looking at the distributive justice component, and that has to do with the amount of money that an employee is receiving or earning. And the second component is the procedural justice component, and that is the fairness of the procedure by which the amount of money paid or earned is determined. Very different components, and the amount of influence that a manager has over each is a little bit different, and I would say significantly less for the first. So there's some particular techniques I have to offset that lack of control. So first, let's get into distributive justice, and that is when we consider an employee's perception of the fairness of amount of money that they are receiving for their unit of input or their level of productivity. So really we're talking about, does the employee feel that they are being rewarded or awarded fairly for the amount of effort they put in? And how do they know that? Usually it's because they compare themselves to others who are doing a similar job, and they're looking at some standard of how much do I put in for a specific amount of time, what level of work. Do I create X number of widgets, and the standard may be 10, and if I create 10 widgets then I get X amount of money. And what do? They don't know if that's fair or not. They compare to the person that's standing next to them. They produce 10 widgets, and if they produce the same 10 widgets, do they get the same amount of pay, or do they get paid more? So the perception of fairness is really based on their perception of what they're getting paid compared to other people, which is problematic because it's very subjective. And so managers, that's one reason why I suggest that managers have very little control over this. And in order to try to decrease the possibility of an incorrect perception, what I advise you to do is to consider creating a narrower band or a narrower range of pay, so that within a range, employees will know that their amount is considered fair. So that is usually one of the very first places where someone has felt that there's bias or there's discrimination, and that pay range then is the area that you need to address in order to reduce the possibilities of that perception. So let's go on to something that you as a manager might have more control over, and that is the procedure or procedure to determine the pay, or procedural justice. And procedural justice really has to do with the fact that the process used to determine the amount of pay is considered fair. And the procedural justice sometimes has more importance than does the distributive justice. So as long as the employee knows that the process by which the amount being paid is determined is fair, is honest, then they can feel that they're given a fair opportunity and they're not being misjudged or bias or some sort of other type of discrimination is going into the formula. And so if there is a very transparent process by which the amount is determined, that often creates a sense of trustworthiness of the pay system and of the pay plan design. And so that means that the manager, you, has the opportunity to be able to explain in a very rational manner, in a very objective manner, why the amount of pay is considered fair or why it's appropriate. And that really allows for a person to try in their own minds to match up the process with the amount, and if they still feel that the amount is insufficient or has been incorrectly calculated, meaning the distributive justice is unfair, then perhaps a appeal or a second review from a higher supervisor might be an appropriate move to make sure that the procedural justice is fair. So if an employee feels, well, gee, you know, the guy standing next to me got paid $10 more than I did, maybe the manager is discriminating against me because I'm female or because I'm a visible minority or for some other reason, then there is an opportunity for that employee to appeal that decision and have someone else in HR maybe look at that procedure and ensure that there isn't any creep of bias or any creep of mitigating circumstances that are so subjective that they should not be included into the design of the pay for performance plan. So these are a couple of areas that I think are important to consider in this module when we start thinking about equity and fairness, and then discrimination based on gender, race, religion, all the isms that fall into the category of discrimination. So when you're taking a look at the different types of plans, whether we're talking about pay for performance, whether we're talking about market, whether we're talking about skill-based competency, again, the equity and the fairness piece applies to all the different types of plans. And so this can traditionally be one of the areas where a manager can ensure that the subjectivity involved in the ultimate ultimate outcome of the decision with regard to income is fair, or at least perceived as fair by the process used to determine it. So I hope that all makes sense. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the discussion in Module 5. Thanks.